The air was thick with the scent of coffee and grease as the neon sign for the Crossroads Diner flickered like a dying star in the vast, dark expanse of the desert night. Highway 327, a long, lonely strip of asphalt, stretched out in both directions, seemingly endless. The diner stood solitary, a beacon for the weary traveler, a place where time seemed to slow to a crawl, and the silence could almost speak. Samantha, known to her regulars as Sam, moved with practiced ease behind the counter. She was 28, her eyes reflecting the weariness of someone who'd seen too much for her years. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands escaping to frame her face with a kind of rugged beauty. She wore her apron like armor, a shield against the oddities that found their way to her diner. The night was already deep, the clock above the door inching towards midnight. The diner was almost empty, save for 2 truckers, their faces etched with the fatigue of a long day on the road, playing chess in the corner. The jukebox, an old relic, played a tune that was both comforting and haunting, stirring memories of places far away. Outside, the darkness was absolute, the kind that made you question if the world extended beyond the diner's glow. Sam's gaze lingered on the window, a subconscious check against the vast emptiness, her eyes catching the flicker of the neon sign, a dance of light and shadow. The bell above the door jangled, announcing the arrival of a new customer. Sam turned, the routine greeting on her lips freezing as she saw him. He was tall, his stature commanding. His face was shrouded by a wide-brimmed hat, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. An odd choice for the dead of night. His coat was long, dusty, and his boots, caked with mud, spoke of a journey long and arduous. "Good evening," Sam managed, her voice steady, despite a sudden unease that crept up her spine. "What can I get started for you tonight?" He settled onto a stool at the counter, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. "Whatever's on special," he replied, his voice deep, resonating with an unsettling calm. She nodded, retreating to the kitchen, her mind racing. There was something about him, something that set him apart from the usual drifters who sought refuge in her diner. She prepared the special, meatloaf with mashed potatoes, her hands moving automatically, her thoughts tangled in the web of foreboding. When she returned, he was gone. Her heart skipped a beat. The plate clinked down on the counter, her eyes darting around the diner. The truckers, still engrossed in their game, hadn't noticed anything amiss. The bell jingled again. There he was, as if he'd never left, sitting exactly where she'd left him. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice a breathy echo that seemed to slither into her ears. The night dragged on, and Sam tried to focus on her tasks. Yet, his gaze, heavy and unyielding, followed her every move. Other patrons came and went, but he remained, his meal untouched, his presence a constant pressure against her awareness. At 3 a.m., the diner was empty, save for them. Sam locked the door, her routine closing tasks, now feeling like a countdown to something ominous. "Why leave it open? We're closed," she explained, her voice betraying a tremor she couldn't suppress. He tilted his head slightly, his movement almost predatory. "I'm not leaving." The words hung between them, thick with unspoken threats. Sam's mind raced. She'd handled her share of difficult customers, but this man, he was different. "Sir, you need to leave," she insisted, her tone firm, a last attempt at asserting control. He laughed, a sound that seemed to crawl under her skin. "Oh, Samantha, I've been watching you for a long time." Her name, spoken with such familiarity, was a violation. She reached for her phone, her lifeline, but it wasn't there. Panic gripped her as she realized he must have taken it during his brief, inexplicable disappearance. "You won't need that," he said, standing up, his height now a looming threat. "We're going to have some fun." The diner's kitchen was within arm's reach. In a split decision, Sam grabbed a large chef's knife, her hand trembling. "Stay back." He didn't. Instead, he pulled out a small rusted knife, twirling it between his fingers with a sinister grace. "You think that'll stop me?" A chase ensued, a deadly dance through the narrow confines of the diner. Sam slashed wildly, but he dodged with an almost supernatural agility, his laughter a cacophony against the diner's usual quiet. She tripped, falling hard, the knife skittering away. He was on her in seconds, his weight pinning her down, his face inches from hers. "Shh," he whispered, his breath hot and invasive. "This doesn't have to be painful." But survival instinct surged through Sam. With a surge of adrenaline, she bit down hard on his hand, tasting the metallic tang of blood. He recoiled, and she scrambled away, her hand grasping a heavy skillet. With all her might, she swung, connecting with his head. The sound was sickening, wet, and crunching. He staggered, blood pouring from his skull. Using the moment of his disorientation, Sam unlocked the door and bolted into the night. Her feet pounded the pavement, the diner's neon sign growing smaller behind her, a fading beacon in the darkness. But the sound of footsteps followed, uneven but relentless. The highway was a void, offering no refuge. She hid behind a large rock, her breath coming in ragged gasps, listening as the footsteps grew faint, then ceased. Minutes felt like hours. When silence finally reigned, she dared a peek. He was gone, or so she thought, until a rustling sound came from behind her. Too late, she turned. His hand clamped over her mouth, the rusted knife at her throat. "Didn't I say we'd have fun?" he breathed, his voice a mix of glee and menace. The night swallowed her scream, the diner's neon sign flickering like a fading heartbeat, marking the spot where Samantha was last seen. The diner's neon glow had long vanished into the night, leaving Samantha in the cold grip of the stranger. His hand, rough and unyielding, pressed against her mouth, stifling any attempt at a scream. The rusted knife's cold edge kissed her throat, a silent promise of violence. Desperation fueled her, and with a sudden, violent shove, she managed to slip from his grasp. Her feet found the ground, and she ran, her heart a drumbeat of fear and survival. The desert stretched out like a silent witness to her plight, the moon casting long, eerie shadows that danced with her every step. After what felt like an eternity, she dared to look back. The night was silent, the stranger nowhere to be seen. Sam's breaths came in sharp, ragged gulps, her mind racing with thoughts of escape, of survival. She stumbled upon a small, abandoned shack, its door hanging open like an invitation. Inside, she barricaded herself, her body collapsing onto the dusty floor, her mind a whirlwind of fear and questions. Flashback to exactly 1 year ago. Sam had arrived at the crossroads with nothing but a backpack and a desire to disappear. Her life before had been a series of bad choices, culminating in a disastrous relationship that left her shattered. The diner, with its forgotten location and endless nights, seemed like the perfect place to rebuild, or at least to hide. The owner, a grizzled man named Hank, had taken her in, no questions asked. "Just keep the coffee brewing and the drifters moving," he'd said with a wry smile. Over time, she learned the diner's rhythms, its quirks, and its secrets. One of those secrets was an old newspaper clipping tucked behind a loose tile in the diner's bathroom. It detailed the disappearance of a trucker, his last known location being the Crossroads. The story was old, yellowed, but it spoke of a night not unlike this one, filled with unease and unspoken dread. Back in the present, huddled in the shack, memories of the past mingled with the terror of the night, Sam's hand found the old clipping in her pocket, one she'd taken from the diner on a whim months ago. It seemed like a grim omen now. The clipping mentioned other disappearances, each with a haunting similarity. All at night, all from the diner. A pattern, perhaps, she hadn't wanted to see before. As the adrenaline ebbed, the cold of the night began to seep into her bones. She needed warmth, a plan, anything to not feel so alone. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the diner, to the life she'd built, however fragile. Was it all just a prelude to this night? Flashback to exactly 6 months ago. Sam had struck up a friendship with a woman named Clara, who was on a cross-country road trip, documenting forgotten places. Clara had an infectious enthusiasm, and for a brief time, Sam felt a connection, a semblance of normalcy. One night, Claire had stayed late, the diner empty except for them. "Ever wonder about the stories here, Sam?" Clara asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Each crack in these walls, each customer, they've all got a tale to tell." Sam had laughed it off then, dismissing the diner's history as just part of its charm. But now, those words echoed in her mind, a warning she hadn't heeded. Now, in the shack, Sam's fingers traced the edges of the newspaper clipping. Clara had vanished weeks after that night, her car abandoned miles away, her camera found with only a few frames left. Frames of the diner at night, one showing a figure in the shadows, too blurred to identify. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She wasn't the first. The diner wasn't just a place, it was a trap. And he, the stranger, knew it all too well. With a newfound resolve, Sam gathered her courage. She couldn't stay. She had to move, to find help, to warn others. But first, she needed to survive the night. The shack offered little in the way of weapons, but she found a rusted crowbar, its weight comforting in her hand. Outside, the night was still, the desert whispering secrets only the wind could tell. Sam stepped out, her eyes scanning the horizon. The diner was out there, a beacon of her past life. But now it felt like a mausoleum, a place of endings. She would go back, not to reclaim it, but to end this cycle. The night was hers now, and with every step, she whispered back to the past. Not this time. The first light of dawn painted the horizon with a faint orange glow as Sam approached the Crossroads diner from the back, her steps cautious, her mind racing with a plan. The night's ordeal had left her with a raw, primal fear, but also a steely determination. She needed to confront her past, find clues, and perhaps gain an edge over the stranger who had invaded her life. The diner was silent, the hum of the neon sign now a soft buzz, its light dimmed by the morning's approach. She circled around to the front, her hand gripping the crowbar tightly. The door was ajar, as she had left it in her desperate escape. Inside, the diner felt different. The warmth it usually exuded was absent, replaced by a chilling emptiness. The counter where she had served countless cups of coffee was now a silent witness to her fears. Flashback to exactly 2 weeks before. A man had entered the diner late one night, his demeanor unremarkable. He was middle-aged, unassuming, with a forgettable face. He ordered pie and coffee, engaging Sam in small talk about the weather and the road. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition or perhaps curiosity, that Sam couldn't place. He left a generous tip, along with a small handwritten note. "Watch the shadows." It was cryptic, odd, and Sam had tucked it away, thinking it was just another eccentric traveler's parting words. Now, standing in the diner's quiet, Sam felt a shiver run down her spine. That note, those words, they were a warning, a piece of the puzzle she hadn't connected until now. She moved behind the counter, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. The cash register was open, cash scattered around. Her heart raced. He had been here, searching for something, or perhaps leaving something behind. She swept through the diner, checking every nook, every shadow for any sign of him. Behind the counter, she found it. A small leather-bound notebook, no bigger than her palm, hidden under a stack of menus. It was old, the leather worn, but inside were pages filled with meticulous handwriting, dates, names, and locations. Among them, she saw her own name, underlined, with the date from last night. Her breath hitched. This was his ledger, a record of his obsessions, his hunts. She flipped through, the names blurring into a macabre list. Clara's name was there, along with a note. Photographer, inquisitive. Sam's heart sank. Clara wasn't just a customer. She was a target. Flashback to this time. Last night. The stranger's first words echoed in her mind. Whatever's on special, he had said, his voice a harbinger of doom. His eyes, though hidden, seemed to bore into her, dissecting her every move, her every breath. When he had vanished and reappeared, that was no trick of her imagination. The notebook now confirmed it. He was methodical, perhaps even supernatural in his stalking. Back in the diner, Sam's resolve hardened. She pocketed the notebook. It was evidence, a key to understanding her tormentor. She needed to leave, to get help, but something told her to wait, to prepare. She barricaded the door, checked the windows, and armed herself with more than just the crowbar. She found an old dusty revolver in Hank's office, hidden in a drawer she'd never dared to open. It was loaded, heavy with the weight of its purpose. As she fortified her surroundings, her mind pieced together a plan. She would not be a victim. The diner, her sanctuary, would become her battleground. If he returned, and she suspected he would, she would be ready. The diner's clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the imminent confrontation. Sam sat at the counter, her eyes fixed on the door, the notebook beside her, the revolver in her lap. She was no longer just Samantha, the waitress. She was a guardian of her own fate, waiting for the predator to return to his chosen hunting ground. The first encounter had been one of fear and flight. The second, she swore, would be one of fight. As the day gave way to evening, the shadows in the Crossroads diner grew longer, the familiar space now a labyrinth of potential threats. Sam's preparations were meticulous. Every window was locked, every potential hiding spot checked. The diner was her fortress, albeit a fragile one, against the unknown terror that stalked her. The revolver lay on the counter, a cold promise of defense, while the notebook, with its chilling entries, was her roadmap into the mind of her pursuer. She knew he would return. The question was when. Flashback to earlier that day. Sam had ventured to the local gas station, the only nearby place with a phone. She called the police, her voice low, urgent, explaining the situation. The operator promised help, but the nearest unit was hours away. "Stay safe. Lock yourself in," the operator advised, which Sam already knew, but hearing it made her feel slightly less alone. Back at the diner, she reinforced her defenses, her mind racing through every scenario. Her training as a waitress had taught her to read people, to anticipate needs, but this was survival, not service. As night fell, the diner's neon sign flickered to life, casting its eerie glow into the darkness. Sam sat at the counter, her back to the wall, giving her a view of the entire diner. The silence was oppressive, each sound magnified. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft ticking of the clock. The first sign of his return was subtle. A shadow moved outside. Not the predictable play of wind and dust, but something deliberate. Sam's hand tightened around the revolver's grip, her heart racing, her breath shallow. The bell above the door jangled, a sound that usually heralded customers, but now was a herald of doom. The door opened slowly, and there he stood, the stranger, his silhouette framed by the night. His hat was still low, his sunglasses in place, despite the darkness. "Good evening, Samantha," he said, his voice smooth, a stark contrast to the tension in the air. "I see you've been busy." Sam didn't reply, her eyes locked on him, her hand steady. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, her voice surprisingly calm. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "Because, my dear, you're next in a very long line. It's nothing personal. You're just convenient." His words chilled her more than the night air. "You won't get away with this," she managed, her resolve hardening. He chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "But I already have, many times." He moved towards the counter, ignoring the revolver aimed at him. "You won't shoot," he taunted. "You're not a killer, Samantha." Her finger hovered over the trigger, her mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. "You don't know me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. As he reached the counter, his hand moved with sudden speed, knocking the revolver aside. It clattered to the floor, sliding out of reach. Sam's training kicked in. She lunged for the crowbar, hidden behind the counter, swinging it with all her might. He dodged, but not fully, the crowbar grazing his shoulder. He winced, a genuine reaction, and Sam felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He could be hurt. He wasn't invincible. The diner became their battleground, tables and chairs their obstacles. Sam was agile, using her knowledge of the diner's layout to her advantage. She knocked over chairs, creating barriers, trying to keep distance between them. "You can't run forever," he called out, his voice now tinged with anger. "I don't plan to," Sam retorted, grabbing a glass pitcher and hurling it at him. It missed, shattering against the wall, but the distraction gave her a moment to regain her footing. They circled, predator and prey. But now the roles were blurred. Sam's fear was morphing into fury, her survival instinct fueling her actions. She needed to end this, not just survive it. In a bold move, she feigned a stumble, dropping to one knee. He lunged, thinking her caught. But Sam rolled, coming up with a revolver in hand, her fingers finding the trigger. The diner fell silent. The diner's silence was suffocating, broken only by their heavy breathing. Sam stood, revolver aimed at the stranger, her hand steady, despite the chaos of moments before. He, in turn, watched her with an unreadable expression, the pain from her earlier strike evident in his stance. "You won't do it," he said, his voice a mix of challenge and curiosity. Sam's finger tightened on the trigger, but something held her back. Not fear, but a realization that this moment could define her forever. "Why should I listen to anything you say?" she countered, her voice firm. He smirked, taking a step closer, hands visible, non-threatening. "Because, Samantha, you're not like me. You still cling to some semblance of morality." The word morality hit her hard, a stark contrast to the night's events. "And you? What do you cling to?" "Survival," he replied simply, his eyes never leaving hers. "And perhaps a bit of chaos." The standoff continued, the air thick with tension. Sam's mind raced. She could end this, end him, but at what cost? And yet the thought of him leaving, perhaps to hunt again, was unbearable. "You're not leaving here," she said, her decision made. He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Then what? We stay here, alone together, until you decide my fate." The idea was absurd, yet there they were, isolated from the world, locked in their own twisted dance. "Tell me why," Sam demanded. "Why me? Why this place? He sighed, as if considering her worthy of an explanation. This diner, it's a nexus of sorts. A place where lives intersect, where stories end or begin. And you, Samantha, you've been a part of it longer than you realize. His words were cryptic, but they stirred something within her, a memory, a feeling of déjà vu. I've been watching you. Not just tonight, but for years, he continued. Chapter 6. The chase begins. The tension in the Crossroads diner was palpable, a living, breathing entity that hung between Samantha and the stranger. His revelation that he had watched her for years sent a chill down her spine, colder than the night air outside. It was more than stalking. It was obsession. A dark fixation that painted her life in shades of fear she hadn't known existed. "You've had your chance to talk," Sam said, her voice steady despite the tremble inside her. "Now, you're going to leave, or we're going to find out just how far I'm willing to go." He stood motionless, his eyes locked on hers, a silent challenge. Then, without warning, he lunged for the revolver, his speed surprising. Sam reacted on instinct, pulling the trigger. The gunshot echoed like thunder in the confined space, but it went wide, missing him by inches. He was on her in an instant, his hand clamping around her wrist, twisting until the revolver fell to the floor again. Sam's training as a waitress, her agility, came to her aid. She kicked out, her foot connecting with his knee, and he stumbled back, giving her a split second to dive for the revolver. But he recovered quickly, too quickly for a normal man, and the chase began. Sam bolted towards the kitchen, her mind racing through escape routes and weapons she could use. The diner's layout, once so familiar, now felt like a maze, designed for a deadly game of cat and mouse. In the kitchen, she grabbed a large chef's knife, spinning around just as he entered, his face a mask of determination. "You can't outrun fate, Samantha," he panted, his voice a mix of anger and something like admiration. "I can outrun you," she retorted, slashing the air between them, forcing him back. The back door was her goal, her escape. She shoved it open, the cold night air hitting her like a wall as she dashed into the darkness. Behind her, his footsteps were relentless, each one a drumbeat of her impending doom. The desert stretched out, a vast, unforgiving expanse. Sam knew this terrain, had walked it countless times, but never like this, never running for her life. She zigzagged, trying to lose him, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. He followed, his pace unnervingly steady, his presence a dark shadow that seemed to grow larger with every step. Sam's mind flashed to the notebook she had found, his ledger of doom. Was this how it ended for them? A chase into oblivion? Her foot caught on a rock, and she went down hard, the knife skittering away. Panic surged through her as she scrambled up. But he was there, towering over her, his face obscured by the night, only his heavy breathing betraying his exertion. "You can't keep running," he said, almost gently, as if he were reasoning with a child. Sam's eyes darted around, looking for anything, any way out. Her hand closed around a smaller, sharper rock, and in a desperate move, she thrust it at him. It caught him off guard, striking his face. He recoiled, giving her the moment she needed. She ran, ignoring the pain in her ankle, her heart pounding so loud, it drowned out the world. The diner was behind her. The desert a silent witness to her flight. The chase was relentless, a testament to his inexplicable stamina. But Sam's will to survive, her anger at being hunted, fueled her. She remembered the revolver, now lost in the diner's chaos. But her knife, her rock, those were her weapons now. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the landscape blurring into a monotonous expanse of fear. Her energy waned, her steps grew heavier. but she dared not stop. The moon, high above, cast a silver glow, guiding her, mocking her with its cold light. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint wail of sirens. Help was coming, but it was too far, too slow. The stranger's presence was constant, a shadow on her heels, a reminder of her mortality. But Sam, driven by fear and fury, kept running, her mind focused on one thought: survive. The chase was on, and in the dead of night, under the vast, indifferent sky, Samantha ran, her life hanging by the thread of her own determination. The desert night was unforgiving, its silence broken only by the sound of pursuit and Sam's ragged breathing. The sirens in the distance were a cruel tease, a promise of salvation that seemed perpetually out of reach. But with each step, Sam's resolve hardened. She wouldn't be another name in his notebook. The terrain began to change slightly, the flat expanse giving way to small hills and outcrops, providing both obstacles and opportunities. Sam's knowledge of the area was her lifeline. She knew of a small cave, a natural formation she'd once taken shelter in during a sudden storm. It wasn't much, but it could give her a tactical advantage, a place to hide or ambush. As she approached the cave, she slowed, her senses heightened. She could hear him still, not far behind, his footsteps now careful, perhaps suspecting a trap. Sam ducked into the cave, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. It was cold, the air stale, but it felt like a sanctuary. Inside, she gathered her breath, her mind racing through options. She had to end this, or at least stall him until help arrived. The cave's entrance was narrow, a bottleneck where she could control the encounter. She positioned herself just inside, out of sight, but with a clear view of the entrance. Her hand found a sharp rock, her makeshift weapon, and she waited, her heart pounding against her chest. Minutes felt like hours. Then, she heard his approach, the crunch of gravel underfoot. He paused outside, perhaps sensing her presence. "Samantha," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the cave. "This is futile. You can't hide forever." "I'm not hiding," she shouted back, her voice echoing, masking her exact location. "I'm waiting." For a moment there was silence, then he stepped into the entrance, his silhouette blocking the moonlight. Sam's grip tightened on the rock. "You've made this interesting, but it has to end," he said, stepping forward. "Now!" Sam lunged, her rock aimed at his head, but he was ready, dodging with supernatural speed. His hand caught her wrist, twisting, and pain shot through her arm, forcing her to drop the rock. But she wasn't defenseless. Using her momentum, she spun, her elbow connecting with his jaw. He staggered back, surprised, and Sam seized the moment to bolt out of the cave, into the night. The chase resumed, but this time, Sam had a plan. She led him towards a more familiar path, one she knew ended at a cliff overlooking a sharp drop. It was risky, but her options were dwindling. The ground underfoot began to slope, the edge coming into view. Sam's heart raced, not just from exertion but from fear. If she miscalculated, this could end badly for both of them. Reaching the cliff, she turned, the edge mere feet behind her. The stranger approached, his pace slowing as he realized the trap. "Clever girl," he said, almost admiringly. "I'm not going over alone," Sam panted, her body tense, ready for the final confrontation. He stepped closer, his eyes glinting with a mix of respect and madness. "Then let's go together." They lunged simultaneously, a tangle of limbs in desperation. Sam's foot found his shin, tripping him, but he grabbed her, pulling her down with him. They rolled, dangerously close to the edge. The world seemed to slow. Sam's survival instinct screamed at her, and with a Herculean effort, she managed to halt their roll just inches from the precipice. Below, the drop was sheer, a dark abyss waiting to claim them. Panting, they lay there, the stranger's grip still tight on her arm, But his eyes, for the first time, showed something other than malice or amusement, fear. "Looks like your fate isn't mine to decide tonight," Sam gasped, her voice raw. He laughed, a sound void of humor. "Perhaps not tonight." With a sudden, desperate push, Sam shoved him away, scrambling back from the edge. He didn't pursue, instead lying there, looking up at the stars, as if pondering his next move. Sam stood, backing away, her eyes never leaving him. The sirens were louder now, closer. Help was nearly here, but the night's terror wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. The outside world, with its laws and order, was encroaching on their deadly game. But for Sam, the real world had always been here, in the shadows, in the chase, in the fight for survival. The sirens grew deafening, a symphony of salvation mixed with the dread of what was to come. Sam stood, her legs weak, her body on the brink of collapse, watching as the stranger lay on the ground, unmoving but for his chest, rising and falling with each breath. The first police car arrived, its lights cutting through the night like beacons. Officers spilled out, guns drawn, their voices a cacophony of demands for the stranger to stay down. Sam stepped back, her role shifting from prey to witness in this surreal tableau. Officers approached, handcuffs ready, but as they tried to secure him, the stranger moved with a fluidity that defied his previous fatigue. In a blink, he was on his feet, dodging the officers with an almost supernatural grace. Sam's breath caught. She knew this wasn't over. "Stop!" she yelled, her voice hoarse, desperate. The officers hesitated, giving him the moment he needed. With a swift, almost theatrical bow to Sam, he darted towards the darkness, the officers in hot pursuit. But the night swallowed him whole, leaving behind a tense silence. Sam was surrounded, questions thrown at her from all directions. She recounted the night's events in a daze, her words a mechanical recounting of terror. Paramedics checked her over, their hands gentle, their voices soothing but distant in her ears. As she was being led to an ambulance, her eyes caught the notebook, fallen during her escape. She broke from the paramedic's grasp, retrieving it. It was her proof, her anchor to reality, amidst the swirling chaos. Inside the ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, Sam flipped through the notebook. Each page was a window into her hunter's mind, meticulously documenting his obsessions. Names, dates, places, a chilling ledger of lives, touched by darkness. Her own name, underlined several times, was a stark reminder of her narrow escape. The ambulance doors closed, and she was alone with her thoughts, the notebook clutched to her chest. The familiar hum of the vehicle, the soft chatter of the paramedics. These were the sounds of safety, but her mind was still in the desert, in the chase. At the police station, the atmosphere was tense. Detectives listened to her story, their expressions a mix of skepticism and concern. The notebook was bagged as evidence, but Sam held onto the memory of those pages, the knowledge that she was not the only one. Detective Rodriguez, a woman with sharp eyes and a stern demeanor, took Sam aside. "We'll find him, Samantha, but you need to understand, this might not be the end. He's resourceful." The warning hung in the air, a grim acknowledgement of the night's events. But for Sam, it was more than a warning. It was a call to action. Days later, after endless questions, statements, and sleepless nights, Sam found herself back at the Crossroads Diner. It was closed. A crime scene do not enter tape barring the door. But she needed closure, or at least to reclaim some piece of her life. Inside, the diner was, as she left it, a silent witness to her ordeal. As she moved through the space, her fingers traced the counter, the tables, each touch a reconnection. In the back room, hidden under a loose floorboard, was her personal safe. Inside, she kept important documents, and now she added the revolver, unloaded, a grim reminder of her resolve. The revelation came unexpectedly. A letter tucked in the diner's old mailbox addressed her. The handwriting was familiar from the notebook. With trembling hands, she opened it. Samantha, you escaped, but let this be a lesson. We are connected, you and I, by more than just that night. Watch the shadows, for they will reveal truths you are not ready for. Remember, survival is not just about running away. Yours in darkness. The letter was unsigned, but the message was clear. Her life, her very being, was now irrevocably intertwined with his. Sam sat at the diner's counter, the letter before her, contemplating her next move. The diner, once her refuge, was now a battleground. Her life a puzzle, with pieces missing but slowly revealing a picture she was only beginning to see. The night's terror had ended, but the game was far from over. For Sam, the chase, the fear, the revelations were not just about survival, but about understanding the darkness that now shadowed her every step. Chapter 9. The Night's Longest Hour. The diner door swung shut behind Sam with a finality that echoed in the hollow space of the crossroads. The letter lay on the counter, a silent accusation, a beacon of the darkness that now infiltrated her world. The clock above the door ticked, each second stretching into eternity, marking the passage of time in a night that seemed to have no end. Sam's mind raced, the words from the letter looping in her thoughts. Watch the shadows. She glanced around, the diner's corners now potential hiding spots, every shadow a possible threat. Determined, she moved through the diner, flipping switches, flooding the place with light, banishing the dark to the edges. But shadows are persistent. They lingered, mocking her attempts at control. The night deepened, and with it, her resolve. She wasn't just waiting for something to happen. She was preparing. From behind the counter, she retrieved a flashlight, her personal weapon against the dark. In the kitchen, she armed herself with a large, sharp chef's knife, her fingers wrapping around the handle with a grim purpose. Time crawled. Sam sat in the booth nearest the door, her back to the wall, her eyes scanning the entrance, the windows. Every sound from outside was amplified, every creak of the building a potential signal of his return. Her thoughts drifted to the notebook, now in police custody, but its contents were etched in her memory. Each name, each location, each entry was a breadcrumb in a trail she was now part of. Why her? The question haunted her. Was it random, or was there a connection she hadn't seen? The diner, her haven, now felt like a trap, a stage set for an inevitable confrontation. Hours passed, the diner's clock ticking towards midnight, when the silence was broken by a soft thud outside. Sam's heart leapt into her throat. She stood, the knife in one hand, flashlight in the other. She approached the door, her steps silent, her breath held. The door handle turned, the jingle of the bell muted by her hand. And there he was, not the stranger, but Detective Rodriguez, her face weary but alert. "Ms. Reed," Rodriguez greeted, her voice low, respectful of the night's hush. "We've been monitoring the area. I wanted to check on you myself." Relief washed over Sam, but it was tinged with an underlying tension. "Has there been any sign of him?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. Rodriguez shook her head. "Not yet." The diner's neon glow cast a surreal light over the scene as Detective Rodriguez entered, her presence both comforting and foreboding. Sam's grip on the knife loosened slightly, but her vigilance remained. The night was young, and despite the detective's reassurances, the air was thick with the anticipation of confrontation. Rodriguez noticed Sam's tense posture. "I've got officers posted outside," she said, trying to ease the palpable tension. We're here for you. Sam nodded, her mind racing through scenarios, planning for every contingency. Thank you, Detective, but I need to know we're ready for anything. Rodriguez's eyes softened with understanding. We are. But remember, you're not alone in this. The weight of those words settled over Sam, a reminder that this wasn't just her fight anymore. She returned to her booth, setting the knife down, but keeping it within reach. Rodriguez took a seat opposite her, their silence filled with unspoken strategies and shared fears. The night deepened, and with each passing minute, the diner felt less like a sanctuary and more like the final battleground. Sam's eyes kept darting to the door, expecting it to burst open at any moment. In the lull, Rodriguez shared bits of information. They had traced some of the names in the notebook to cold cases, disappearances over decades, all linked by the diner. The realization that she was part of something much larger, something with roots deep in the past, was daunting. We've got forensic teams going through everything, Rodriguez continued. We'll catch him, Samantha. We'll end this. But Sam knew that for her, this would end only when she faced him again. Her resolve was steel, forged in the fires of her recent trials. As the clock neared the witching hour, the air shifted, a palpable change in pressure, a whisper of fate arriving. The bell above the door jingled, and there he stood, the stranger, his presence darkening the diner more than the night outside. Detective, he acknowledged Rodriguez with a nod, his voice smooth, unconcerned. Samantha, he added, his gaze settling on her with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. Rodriguez stood, her hand on her service weapon. On the ground now, she commanded. He smiled, a chilling, knowing smile. I think not. This ends on my terms, or not at all. The standoff was tense. Rodriguez's radio crackled with alerts from outside, but he was unfazed. Sam, however, was ready. She had planned for this moment, her strategy simple but effective. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the knife, throwing it with precision. It missed his heart, but embedded in his shoulder, causing him to stagger back. Rodriguez moved in, but he was quick, too quick, dodging her and coming for Sam. They collided, a tangle of desperation and fury. Sam's training in self-defense, coupled with her sheer will to survive, gave her the edge. She managed to pin him down, her knee on his back, her hands securing his arms. Rodriguez was on him in an instant, handcuffs clicking into place. You're under arrest, she stated, her voice firm despite the adrenaline. Sam stood back, watching as officers swarmed in, taking him into custody. He was subdued, but his eyes, locked on hers, promised this was not the end. As he was led away, Sam felt a mix of relief and unease. Rodriguez approached, her expression complex. You did good, Samantha. Really good. But the victory felt hollow. Sam knew this was just a chapter closed, not the book. The stranger's words haunted her. Watch the shadows. Weeks later, the diner reopened, its neon sign a beacon in the night once more. Sam resumed her life, but she was different now, more aware, more prepared. The diner was her ground, and she was its protector. Every night, she watched the shadows, ready for whatever might come. The stranger was behind bars, but his influence lingered, a dark undercurrent in her world. Sam knew she might never fully escape the shadow he cast, but she was ready,